Well, I think she can miss the intro, right? So I'll just say, I'm Daniel Schiavone. I'm with Snake Hill Web Agency in Baltimore. The other night I was watching The Expanse. Has anybody seen that? On Sci-Fi Channel. Excellent sci-fi. Takes place in the year 2350. So 332 years in the future. A character announces he's from Baltimore, and everyone's concerned how he, escaped, Baltimore. So apparently in the year 2350, there's still going to be The Wire. Damn that show. That show has done more damage to Baltimore. If you want to see Baltimore, watch The Diner. It's a movie Diner, not The Wire. So that's my intro. My background is I was actually trained as a fine artist, a painter. I ended up doing many different things, and then I made the mistake in the early 90s of buying a computer, and it all went to hell in a handbasket from there. So I've been doing technology from most aspects since then, and this is my third business, Snake Hill, that I've helped start. The first one was an art nonprofit, and if you come to Baltimore, it's called the Creative Alliance at the Patterson. It's a big. They probably hire 40 or so people there. And my second one was another IT services company. We did network services and some software, and I ran the software. So there's a little intro. So in running my own agency with my partner, who was also my wife, that's okay, we're stalling for you. So I like to look at our operations all the time. What's going on? What's the weak point now? Where can we improve? Continuously improving the business, and one of those places is design, and where I started off like separating my creative world from the technology world. They've been colliding of late, and getting re-engaged with design. And I think design, especially in the Drupal community, is really important and does not get the attention it deserves. Hence this talk, which I've done now. This might be the fourth time. So you have the benefit of that experience. A little bit more about you. Who in here considers themselves a web designer? Oh, not a few. Who considers themselves a themer? A few more hands. Who thinks of themselves a front-end developer? All right, a little bit more. We're getting there. Who is a UX designer? Who is a UI designer? And who knows the difference? So we have a lot of words for similar roles in the design world, and I'd like to talk about design in the context of Drupal, but also talk about in a general sense. And so when you go to art school, you take a art history 101, and you spend a year, and usually, back when I took the course, it started with this slide. Now, since then, there are older cave paintings that have been found, but this is the Venus of Middendorf. And we start here because this is an early example of art, representation. And what you notice is that as you take that Art 101 course, the way we see ourselves changes over time. And certainly in the brief history of the web, we've seen things differently as well. So this is the very first website. You've probably seen this before. It's from 1991. And we basically had hypertext and links. and a little bit of formatting, but not much else, right? Well, since then, there's been a lot of things happening, and in that brief period of time. So we have 27 years, is it, of the web? So, we go from hypertext to, here we have CSS, or tables, and here we have JavaScript, and then we have CSS, we have Flash here in the middle, we've got grids, and then more recently we have responsive in the past, say, 8 years or so. And we had this thing, flat design, that oddly enough came from the Microsoft world. And then from there we've got this minimalism. And so things have changed with the technology and the tools, and also with the styles. And I find it interesting that tools sometimes dictate styles, and vice versa. Styles demand certain tools. And I do like to look at how that works. We will. And somehow, a few years back, we ended up here, which I find with brutalism. Who's heard of web brutalism? Nobody in this room. So, and oddly enough, we have it show up in a conservative, fairly conservative business website, the Bloomberg site, and it fascinates me on so many levels. The context of where their design shows up, that there would be this return to web-safe colors, which would, correct me if I'm wrong, I think there were 312 web-safe colors. This is back, we didn't have millions of colors on the computer yet. So these are web-safe colors, and with basic fonts, basic formatting. And you can go look at other sites that are brutalist but not ironic, like Craigslist is philosophically brutalist. Or you can go to Richard Stallman's website. Richard Stallman is one of the inventors of Linux and GNU founder. You can go to his website, and again, philosophically, it is brutalist because he doesn't want certain things in his code. Right? He wants to control those things because he's pure 100% open source, and he doesn't need all that other stuff. So we've had 27 years of history, and we end up here somehow in one spot. So, and then what's next? So, I don't know how many people read those articles that come out at the end of the year, and it's like the web trends, design trends of 2017, 2018. It's always kind of interesting and not interesting to look at them, because they all kind of say what we're seeing anyways. But I wonder about these things. So there's certain trends that are undeniable, definitely mobile, except for the desktop is still pretty popular. So mobile first, but desktops are pretty prominent. Tablets have had flat growth recently. So the adoption of tablets have slowed down, probably because of mobile is pretty decent and you got it in your pocket all the time, and the phones are getting bigger. The whole Internet of Things seems to be creeping in very slowly, and it's still kind of new, fresh territory, and definitely someplace to explore. But then we're getting this aggregation where your website is viewed outside the context of the actual website. So you've got Twitter cards and Google search results, and how designers can affect those, and developers can affect those things, and how it is seen outside the context of your website, which is more and more important, and which is in direct conflict with this thing, the open web, which I think is open source people. We're rooting for the open web, and let's see where it goes, right? And then there's this ubiquity with big hero images everywhere. And we just got done with this discussion about sliders and how nobody clicks on sliders, right? And so we're doing less sliders. Clients still like them. I think we probably still like them a little bit. But now we replace them with a big hero image. And unless you're like selling a singular product, it's problematic for most designs. Especially Drupal people are involved in complex, sophisticated sites that might have lots of information and lots of interactivity. So I don't know. I wonder, is the hero? Is that really? You're hinging design on a singular photograph or a group of professional photographs. So I wonder. Is that today's slider? Is that going to go away? We have trends, so it's definitely going to go away sometime, right? And then we have the background videos coming in, and those, if you're sensitive to that sort of thing, it might make you a little nauseous. And I wonder, is that today's scrolling text or MIDI music behind the screen, right? I've seen some in an agency site, and you got people walking around the office to cubes or their huddle spots, and you're like, well, how is that adding to the message other than showing potential clients a little flash, a little zip? Is it zip in design, or is it just annoying? I don't know. Minimalism, and what we're finding in minimalism is that there's limited use cases for it. It doesn't work for everything. Again, a lot of sites have a lot of information, or have to present a lot of design elements in one site. And then with flat, what we found is that having things flat is sort of cool, but in order to distinguish similar elements from each other, you still need to do a little more to get things to pop and to be improved usability. So there's limits to all these things, and there's no black and white here. There's a lot of gray territory, a lot of interesting things to discuss and explore about what's next. So I don't have an answer for what's next. But it's an interesting thing to explore. So in the Drupal world, we have this thing, we have this community dynamic that seems to constantly pit people who see themselves as designers against the programmers. Because we have a platform, a really great platform, that's really driven by programmers, coders, and that tends to influence a lot of decisions in the product, but also sets up a conflict. And we keep talking about in the community how to improve that dynamic, or to give usability and design more prominence. So in Drupal 7 was supposed to be a usability release. A lot of the usability stuff was the first stuff that you would turn off on a new Drupal 7 site. In Drupal 8, we have the out-of-the-box experience, which is a noble endeavor, and I think it's probably doing more to change things for the better than most things. The Unami in Drupal 8, the sample food magazine that you can turn on. There are concerns about that though, and that people are going to misread that as a starting point for a site. The same way they saw the example commerce site had a install that people started to use as a starter site for commerce. So there's problems and challenges in many of those things. And with Unami, it's how they've had to commit a starter theme into core, and in doing that, they're doing things they would never do in a real site, like put content, like committing content to a repository, right? So there's some interesting discussion around that I think designers should be a part of, which is great. All right. So, and I would encourage people who do consider themselves designers, UI designers, UX designers, web designers, to get involved in this discussion about how design fits into Drupal. And when we did the DrupalCon in Baltimore, I was a front-end track chair, and we had this big debate about where design fit into the tracks, and it became apparent that there was a real issue because we didn't have the word design in any of the track titles. And we had the word design sprinkled into a few of the track descriptions. And so when DrupalCon in Nashville, when I went to submit sessions to DrupalCon Nashville, I noticed, in spite of having this big discussion, we still didn't have the word design in any of the track titles, which I think does a disservice, because we could be a lot of people enter into web development as designers. They might start as print designers and go to web design. There's different paths we all take to Drupal, and that one is an important one. But there also wasn't clear in the descriptions where design would fit in. So I think it's a problem in Drupal, but it's a problem that can be solved by involvement by designers, and to demand that we stick the word design into a track title. It's the least we can do, right? And we should also have a place on Drupal.org to show off designs and talk design, and we should definitely have a channel in the Drupal Slack channel. We have front-end Slack channel in the drupal.slack.com, but there's no design one there. And like front-end, when you say front-end, people I think are talking about JavaScript front-ends, themers, but they're not necessarily talking about design and UX design or UI design. So, who are these designers? Well, that's the who. That's not the designers. Who are these designers? This is Doctor Who. This is not the designer. So, again, how do designers become web designers? Print designers start designing for the web. I know I've run across many people who have gone that route. Programmers end up doing front-end code, and that can be fine. But design is I think we underestimate soft skills quite often, especially in the world of design. That there's so much there to learn and to experience with typography and color and layout and all the basic design elements that we have out there. I would not call myself a web designer, even though I have 7 years of art school. And when you're designing for Drupal, it's a very unique situation because you don't really have a blank canvas when you're designing for a CMS like Drupal. That there, and we tend. I've seen a lot of designers start from a blank Photoshop file, right? So we should be using the nails that are already on the wall when we're designing for Drupal. There are certain things that Drupal spits out. So here we go. Is it going to load? Here we go. So this is a fresh Drupal install with a custom theme that I created. Called, I think the theme is called 8. Right? And these are the regions in the theme. And these are, those are the blocks, and these are the regions. The regions are red, the blocks are in blue. So this is actually what you're designing to, right? You've already got a structure that's being provided for you in Drupal. And how do we take that and make it look like something that you want to investigate more? And how do we make something that is effectively communicating with the person using the site? So, originally we had this like 12-column grid thing that was out there, and in some ways it's still out there. And that is a structure that is some overlaid on on the regions and blocks. And then we had another cool solution with Bootstrap and starter themes like that with responsive grids, and that was that's been good. I think it's coming to end of life though. So next we have CSS grid, which makes a lot more sense. So instead of trying to fit all your elements into a fixed width grid, we have individual elements occupying the space that they need to occupy. And right now I think we're at 70% browser support for CSS grid, and when that ticks up a little bit, that's where we're going to be moving to, and that's better. Things can always be better. Once you investigate CSS grid, I think, I don't know how many people have heard of it. A couple? Good. And so you see it and you go, okay, this is better. I want to use this. If you use it right now, you have to fail over to that, unfortunately, for the 30% of browsers. So one thing I wonder about, and it's probably because of my training as a painter, in art school you would use a viewfinder like this to make a drawing or a painting. You'd see where things laid in the picture plane. And I had one first-year professor who was obsessed with the picture plane, and whether you break the picture plane or bring something to the edge of the picture plane. Now, of course, our picture plane is, for the web, is this. But most sites scroll up and down, right? We don't really use the picture plane there's not many sites that use picture plane in a creative way. As a designer, as a person who builds websites, we have to balance convention with innovation, right? So the convention is scrolling up and down. And now that we're seeing everybody walk around with their thumbs scrolling up and down or swiping, that action is becoming more and more common. And at one point, do we start exploring other ways of doing that? On a phone or a tablet, that swipe is going to be more natural than on a computer where you're using arrow keys, I guess, or a mouse scroll. scroll thingy. So this is one site I found out there that kind of broke convention. I enjoyed it for many. I enjoy it for many reasons. I think the design fits with the site. It uses these sprites for animation. It's a little bit heavy to load, but it's fun. And it kind of shows some of the other possibilities. So, this is a diagram I draw for clients, usually first meeting, some version of this diagram. And what I'm trying to do when I'm talking to a client, they think they want a website, right? And I kind of want to sell them a website, but I don't know if that's the right thing to sell them, or they know why they want a website. In order for us to be successful to design and build a website, we need some information, and it's shocking how often that information isn't there, right? So the way I explain their website that they think they want, is that it's in the middle of their web ecosystem. So what they really want is, and I guess I'm still struggling with the terminology, they want a web presence, or they want a web strategy. They want to communicate with a web community, right? They want an outreach. And usually this is mostly around marketing, and that intersects with their web ecosystem. But it often, especially in projects that I've been involved in, are involved in business automation or operations. So those two things kind of merge in the web strategy, and at the center of that is this website that has a marketing piece, a public face that people see, trying to communicate what an organization does, what kind of their value proposition, what's in it for you. And then maybe people log in and it's involved in more business operations. They might create an account, they might set up a profile, they might make a purchase of something. And that automates business stuff. And so this is the challenge for a web designer, is to how, when you go to a client, or any web agency, you go to a client and you say, well, why do you want a website? And they say, well, we want to increase business, right? They want more customers, say. And then you, as a web developer, web designer, web agency, start thinking, well, can I really get them more business? I mean, how am I gonna do that? And then you start asking, well, in order to do the marketing piece, what have you done for branding, right? And they've got this logo that somebody created 50 years ago, that they're really tied to because grandpa, company owner, had his buddy, wherever it came from. And somehow you got to put it into, the Bloomberg site or something better, hopefully. And then you go down this rabbit hole of like, well, how do you have design guidelines, all that stuff, all that designer stuff that we love, and you're down that hole. So they may or may not be ready for their website. So you got to say, well, I would love to build you this website, but you're not ready. Or you say, hey, I can redesign a logo, but it's about logos, it's about branding. It's not as simple as logos, right? And the same thing with the operation side is we want to sell more stuff, or we want to automate this business process. Well, what is your business process? And you find out that the technology is not going to fix the business process. So you might call in a business consultant, which I've done before, and say, hey, you should talk to my friend, he's a business consultant. And they turn to you and say, you're out of your mind. I've been running this business for 30 years. Why would I need something like that. And that actually situation turned out pretty well, I mean, in the end, for the client. So we get into all this other stuff that's not website, that's not design. And yet, if you're an agency, if you're a designer, this is the kind of things you have to tackle, right? So how do you gain audience? So I drew this diagram. So we have, potential audience, and we kind of have a funnel, or in this case, a Nautilus type shape, where we bring in, we have potential audience, we have external users, they see the public site, they might log in, they might become a current audience, or somewhat a captive audience, and then you have the stakeholders and staff that are running the site, and that becomes, hopefully everyone becomes more aware of what audience is. And then you think, well, they're expecting a design. Where do we start with design, right? And we used to start with sketches. You try to keep a low fidelity sketches as rough as possible. Or you might start with sticky notes, something rough. But you're already talking design, and you sort of skipped a couple of steps, I think. We used to skip a couple of steps, and we'd go right to wireframes. And at this point, the client's looking at this, and this is what they're expecting. Mm-hmm. If that particular page looks any different than that, they're going to come at you like 6 months, a year from now, and they're looking at their website, and they're going, wait a minute, what happened on that trainer and education page? What happened to that thingamabob thingy that was in that drawing 10 months ago? So, these particular processes are definitely not perfect, and who knows if they really work. And then, we do this for the development team. We give them a guideline of colors and typography, and we hand this over to developers, and then we expect them to design endless amounts of pages for this, which is very problematic because most developers are not good at this stuff. And we might show the client something like this, and this is a little better because it gives a sense that, okay, this is, you can choose your font and your color, and this is sort of the way thingies will look, and you like A, B, or C. And this is a little bit better, going through instead of a comp or a wireframe. A little bit better way to go. These style tiles. Still not perfect. And then, I thought when they redid Drupal.org, I thought and there's the URL. If you haven't visited this URL, you should go there. A lot of thought was put into the redesign of Drupal.org, and I thought the way their use of mood boards was excellent. Gave you a sense of how individual elements would look. Give you a sense of overall gestalt without promising how particular pages would look. So this is better way to go through things. But they're all problematic in many ways. So after you've gone through this design process, and maybe you've agreed on all this, now you have to figure out how to produce the theme, the front end of the site, and you might have a process, right? So this is the process that we have, that I've completely partially stole from somebody else. And I will remember his name in a moment. Don't have it written down. But this idea of agile and having sprints, right? And then breaking in each sprint into, in our case, a week of planning, 2 weeks of development, a week of testing, and then overlapping them so that development and testing is happening all the time. Well, how do you do design with that? And so what we've landed so far, and it's still up for improvement, is to lay design on top of that. So we're actually designing to something that kind of exists, maybe in a rough form. But as you go through the sprints, you're going to have stuff to design towards. You might do some general stuff before this, but then you get into design and you're like, well, how is it going to look? How are these different pieces that we're building out, forms and views and blocks of information, how's all that going to look? And I also found that designing as a team worked. To have a technical person at design meetings, having a, we have many different roles. So it might be the same person who has UX role, UI design role, theming role. It might be the same person, might be 2 people, might be 3 people. But bringing them together, making sure that you're not designing something that's going to be really hard to code, or something that's so off from what Drupal is going to produce for you that it's going to affect the budget in a big way. So I do think designing as a team, overlaying it so that maybe the design develops over time, and this could be for, this might be a big project that's 6 months, a year down the road. So design in the beginning, your ideas are going to change by the time you get 8 months in, right? 10 months in. By the time you launch the thing, you've built stuff in between that either is not designed or poorly designed because you had no concept of it when you began the project. So waterfall doesn't work for design anymore. You just can't do it that way. Or you can, but it's better not to. So, but I like to ponder design. This is a friend of mine, Christian, who tweeted this thing, and he has the luxury of teaching at Maryland Art Institute, so he can be a little more ponderous in his tweets. So do the tools come first, or do the how do we establish context? How does context, tools, and tools affect design, or are we just kind of putting a crust on top of the stuff? And it's an interesting thought that I'd like to explore. And one of my pet peeves is designing with Photoshop, and I think that we're making progress on better tooling for designers, but we still have a lot of people designing with Photoshop, and it's part of the toolkit. But I think we have to recognize the limits, that we're designing websites with photo editing software. So for instance, you know how we had drop shadows and everything, right? In web design. Web design started drop shadows on buttons and little blocks and stuff. Where did that come from? It came from Photoshop. When they introduced layers, we started doing drop shadows and everything. The tools can often inform the design, and we might be aware of that or might not be aware of that, but it's better to be aware. And how is that tool affecting it? We're making websites look like Photoshop. I mean, for a while there, you could even tell if a photo was Photoshopped. People have gotten much better now, and the tools have gotten much better. But there was a certain look. It was like, and then, as we were like shifting from film photography to digital photography, there was a real point of contention amongst, photographers and other people who contend about that kind of thing. So, even amongst a photographer, using the frame, the original frame of the photograph might be a especially important concern, right? But then you're bringing in the Photoshop and you're doing the touch-up in Photoshop with a digital darkroom, right? So I saw this in an article when I was updating the slides. So, and I think this comes to the crux of the challenge being a web designer is, we spend all this time making pixel perfect fabrications of what we're going to build, right? So even the photos, we're picking ideal elements. We're constantly selling the client on the design, right? So we're not going to pick a crappy photo for the comp. We're going to pick a really nice photo that works. If the photos are in the square format, it's going to work in a square format. We're going to pick text for the comp that's going to fit in the space provided and be the same length across horizontally, so all the text fits. And then we bring this thing in the real world, and the photos are subpar, or they're oblong or wide, and then they got to get cropped, and then we got Drupal cropping the photos, or we might have the CSS cropping the photos and the HTML, and then we have text that's too long, too short, not cut off in the right spot, and then, and then guess what? All those problems are getting solved by developers and not getting solved by designers. And so suddenly we've lost sight of the design. And then the developers are like, wow, I'm just going to 50 characters, dot, dot, dot. and it's like, only developers would think in terms of characters. We might think it's better to think of things in words, right? Why would you, cut off a word? So, the tools are getting better. And I updated this list from what I had in here before. And I stole someone's categorization of them. So we do have better tools, I'm always looking for inspiration. I find these particular spots not inspiring to me, because what I'm seeing is sites with big, huge, beautiful photos and no web design in them, right? But we need to start somewhere. And there's also a Drupal design site. I don't know what happened to it. I thought it was in this slide. But there is a Drupal design site. And then, for wireframes, wireframes are kind of on the way out. So the tool set is not huge. They're still out there. But then we have Sketch is huge. And then web-based tools like Figma that does Sketch better than Sketch in a more collaborative way. And we still have our desktop tools, Photoshop and Illustrator. And then we have our prototyping tools for, push stuff out. And that's just exploding, the prototyping tools out there. Because we're a little more interested in interactivity and designing interactivity. I think it's really important. It's hard to do in smaller projects, but we're definitely more focused on that. Design workflow is still not great. It's still something that's in flux, and handing off designs for client feedback. There are some pretty decent tools there, and I think some of these other tools can serve double duty for that. So the tools are getting better. All right, so some food for thought. And there's this Frank Chimero. I really like his writing. I like the way he displays his posts on his site. He's kind of slowed up recently, but he might have one or two a year. I've seen that some of these other relevant articles are ran across and updating this presentation. You might want to take a look at. But I'd be interested in what you're all reading, where you're going for food for thought. More inspiration sites. Some a list apart, Smash Magazine, are kind of typical. I don't like it when things get overly spammy. I want to be inspired by it. Sooner or later they tend to either get spammy or someone gets hired as a consultant and it stops. So maybe people here could start up something and then in a couple of years you become a consultant, right? At least we have something to read for a couple of years. But I think places for this kind of discussion about design, I find that there's some interesting pieces here and there. I don't find a lot of real engaged, interesting, more theoretical, more higher level discussion about design in the web world. I'd be interested in finding more. Where's the Drupal? I think the Drupal site is here. Drupal Paradise. Yeah, there it is. And that's where I think more involvement from the design community is really important. So we do have the Drupal groups on Drupal.org. Drupal.org kind of, I don't know, it seems to have less activity, but I still think it's very important. I still think it's very unique to Drupal. So it'd be great if we could all leave here today and just start posting the hell out of Drupal design group. The Drupal Slack channel, there is not a design channel. Like I said, there's a front end, and maybe that is a space for discussion. The problem with the Drupal Slack is that it's the free account and they disappear in less than 2 weeks, so not much time to catch up with the conversation. So maybe we need a Drupal design .slack.com account somewhere. But we'd like to see more discussion in the design community. And maybe there is, and I just don't know about it. So if you know where these discussions are happening, let me know. Some of the Drupal design leaders, we kind of need an update here. I'm not sure how active Emma Jane is much anymore. Danny Norton, we did have her keynote Baltimore Drupal Camp, and that was great. But we definitely could use more people blogging and writing articles and out there talking about design. And if anybody is doing that and wants to be considered as a keynote speaker at the Baltimore Drupal Camp, let me know, please. Or if you know of somebody. So that's hopefully put some discussion points out there, probably more questions than answers, and hopefully that's okay. We'd love to keep this conversation going. Some community things I just want to point out is Drupal for Gov, July 31st, August 2nd. It's free training, 3-day camp, the second biggest camp in the country after Bad Camp, around 800, 1,200 people, down at the National Institute of Health in Bethesda. If you're ever down in Baltimore, visit us first Wednesday night at Bertha's in Fells Point for the Baltimore Drupal Camp. Drupal Meetup. Drupal Camp, we got it coming this September. We'll be posting a date soon. Keep an eye out. And I did a session for DrupalCon Nashville. It was titled Big Changes for Small Agencies. If you're interested in that sort of thing, it's up. The video is up on the DrupalCon Nashville site. But we also formed a channel a couple of years back for discussion around small Drupal shop. Right now we don't have it hooked up so you could self-register, but if you just go to drupal.slack.com and go to our small Drupal shop channel there and ping me, I'll get you registered on it. With that, hopefully we have people want to talk.
Are you going to be able to upload the slides?
Yes, they will be uploaded. A slightly older deck is available on SlideShare, but I'll get the most recent one up on there. And it's recorded, which is good, because a lot of the slides don't say anything. I had one friend of mine did a business presentation. My business consultant, right? He's the Zen business consultant. He had a deck of slides, a group of like 200 suits in the room, right? Every slide was very Zen. It was like, pastoral landscape, mountain, footprints in the snow. Do you know someone in the middle of that presentation stood up and asked him whether he was going to be posting the slides? I'm thinking, like, what are you going to get out of the slides? I mean, they're like pictures of sunsets and stuff and footprints in the sand. I mean, what? But yeah, no, they're up there. I'll put a bunch of them on the SlideShare. Anybody want to talk design? Like thoughts on, designers in Drupal or design trends, or what challenges or tools? Any tools that I didn't put up? Yes.
I guess if you're taking challenges, like one thing that I've found the challenge is like we've talked about like collaboration, like bringing like different people in earlier, but then I feel like it gets kind of confusing because everyone is looking at it from their perspective. I think given the nature of like the medium of like the internet or like whatever, it's like you're looking at design, but at the same time you have someone that's probably asking questions of like, oh well, like what content type is that going to be? Like what is that little box that I'm looking at? Then the architect is like, how does this fit in with whatever? And then it becomes like, I don't know, I feel like it's easy to get like lost in there. So that's like a challenge that I've been having. Is like, what lens do we look through at like certain points in like the design, process? Because sometimes it feels like it gets a bit territorial, where it's like the developer has like a thought and the designer's like, no. Then it just, I don't know. I just get a headache.
Well, I think that comes about because it's the design happening first,
Right.
and I think that's the problem. So I think we missed this slide. I don't know.
We did.
Yeah, we did.
I spent a lot of time on this drawing. Just this. So atomic design we didn't talk about. How did that happen? All right. Well, I mean, I think that's what does HTML spit out? That is, you're going to have it, right? And that's this. Basically, I define the atoms as anything that HTML is in the HTML spec, right? And then what are the molecules? And so these are like Drupalish things that it is always going to spit out basic Drupalish things, and then these get combined. These molecules get combined in these organs. So we have, and it gets a little, the metaphor gets a little less valuable as you move on. And then we have the organisms of landing pages and layouts and sections of the site. And the problem with design this way is that you have to always be looking for the overall effect of the design, right? And that's why as a designer you're probably more focused on that. So if you're designing to what Drupal's going to spit out, I think, then you have the answers to those questions, right? So if you can come up with all that basic, which I'd really love to have, is for Figma, a bunch of molecules I could throw into Figma. And maybe that'd be a good community project, is developing, Drupal-ish modules, chunks that can be thrown in either Sketch or Figma. But you go, block, view block list, view block table, view block grid, stuff like that. Then you are at the real starting point of that. And I think the tools are getting to the point where they're getting to that level of sophistication, where not only do you have that, but from a tool like Figma, sooner or later you're going to say, spit out HTML, CSS, or even better, update my site with this particular design. And I think that's where people are working towards. It's a very difficult place to be, but as designers, you got to be connected up. Those are, relative having worked more on the development side and the back-end side, those are relevant questions because you can be affecting the budget so much just by designing a calendar like in a way that's very difficult to code. Any little element will affect the design so much, and you don't always have the budget to do that kind of thing, to really go across the grain. Yes, sir.
Well, I come from a programming background, but the reason I got into programming to begin with, my father was a sign painter. I grew up painting and drawing, and my father said, "Don't do that, you'll starve to death.
Mm-hmm.
Go find a real job." And so, I
What a
have
horrible thing to say to a child, but go ahead.
I have sort of the rudiments of an artistic sensibility, but it was never really formally trained.
Yeah.
And so I struggle with the conflict between form and function.
Mm-hmm.
And you see some people, and extremists on both ends drive me crazy, because you see some people who say that the appearance doesn't matter, all that matters is that it functions properly, and whether it appears in a certain way and communicates what it's supposed to do effectively is part of whether or not it functions. So the appearance does matter.
Right.
And early on, I got really frustrated with people who were designing web pages as if they were designing magazine layouts, because the web is a fundamentally different medium.
Mm-hmm.
It would be as stupid as if someone were to direct a movie as if he were creating a magazine layout, because it's not the same medium. And I haven't really seen any indication that a really mature language that covers the medium we're talking about is out there.
Well, I think that's what I'm looking for, trying to, that's the interesting thing about talking about web design, is like what are the term? Now, I didn't go to school for web design, so maybe I'm ignorant of what, and it sounds like this institution
Well, me
does.
too. So we're in the same boat in that
but
regard.
To your point about sign painters, Alex Katz was a sign painter. There were a bunch of modern artists who have been sign painters. So you have the tools even if you're just with Dad on his job. But
well, this is what I look at certain designs and I see, it's like, what kind of an idiot put that color text on that color background? It's unreadable.
Oh, yeah.
That violates just all kinds of rules. But you really are kind of constrained in some ways, because it's not fine art. You talked about rather than moving vertically through your site, moving horizontally through the site. That only works if you can somehow communicate to your audience so that they have an expectation to try it. Otherwise, they'll never know that there's those things beyond the boundary, right?
True.
And the example you gave, it always overlapped, so you could always see that maybe there was more out there, and so it did sort of invite people to kind of, well, can I pull it to one side and see more? But if you aren't careful, you could end up with whole huge parts of your site that nobody would even try to get to.
True, but there are ways to. I mean, I just saw an article. I think it was in the Washington Post. It was about the disparity between the number of men and the number of women in China and India, and it was a fascinating article for other reasons, right? But it was also fascinating the way they published it. Because as you scroll down the article, you got an illustration. The illustration might have a little bit of animation. And then you hit the illustration, and you continued scrolling, it would scroll horizontally. And then you hit another area, and it would scroll vertically again. I was thinking, it made me think there's so few articles you read on the internet we read so much on the internet, but so few articles are designed to be read on the internet. I mean, I think we even do a poor use of links, right? And I think Medium.com has done a good job of showing like how typography could work that is meant to be read, right? Or, there's some articles showing up that do good, like I noticed on one article, there was text highlighted that was there to be shared. Like the pull quote was, you could hover over it. Say, hey, this is what I want to tweet out, is this essential point of the article. And there's so much that doesn't do that. Like that's like less than 1% of the internet is actually using the medium. And, it's to your point. But it's also like the part that's fascinating, right? That's fun.
Well, I mean, you spend a lot of time designing something in Drupal, and you have an idea of how much space is going to be occupied and stuff. And then you have the content providers, and half the content providers can't even be bothered to deal with grammar, much less the visual impact of the actual words. They're not thinking as a calligrapher would. This is a line that's so wide. They're only concerned with, does it say what I wanted it to say, and whether it fits into your design is not something they worry about.
And the whole problem with that whole grid thing, it's fixed width.
Right.
You're saying, okay, this is 1,020, whatever pixel width you're using, and more and more screens are wide. But it's also,
content providers don't think in terms of you can as a website designer or even as a coder look at responsive design, but your content provider's not going to.
No.
And so they can wreck anything you can build.
This is true, and this is why we have images and WYSIWYGs to wreck the design, right? But there are tools out there, right? So there's paragraphs, shows some promise, and the layout initiative, things there that are starting to creep in, where a content person could actually start to do some things, right? And maybe there needs to be guides written out, because I don't think anybody's teaching anybody anyways how the difference between, we had a client, they had a print magazine they would put out. They were like a trade organization, and the head of the organization, his name was Tom, and he had a column in his print magazine called Tom's Blog, yet he didn't have a blog. And was it Tom's fault or our fault, right?
Right.
We need to educate people and get them to publish things properly. And maybe these bigger publications, maybe what the Washington Post did in this article, maybe what they're doing is they're teaming up the writer with a designer, or
Well, I
for a
think
major article.
maybe getting more interdisciplinary and getting the programmers and coders and front-end guys talking to the graphical designers, and ultimately getting some way of communicating back to the content providers.
We started doing that at my company, and it's been very good.
Oh,
so
that's
far.
good. Great.
Having some developers sit down with the designers, because we ask things like, what happens when that image isn't the right size? And they go, oh, well, I hadn't thought of that.
Yeah.
That's what we're trying to do too. And what we just had on a site that I was working on, with the new design, they had this hero image that had to be pre-sized, and they had this little block that was like a little blurb on what the site was about, and the design had it perfectly lined up, but the text that they had was too long, and it made the block too big, and then it wasn't lined up, and I had to cap the block So we had to change the text because the original text was too long. And then with a new design on another one we're working on, they're not really thinking about the content editors and how they have to input this to make this design just to do something very simple. But because the design wants this specific layout, we're going to have to build it a specific way just to make it do that. And then the editor, just to add a couple links, has to edit multiple fields or check boxes just to do something so simple. And they're not really thinking about the content editors, more of just the site visitors.
Right.
Really thinking that, so.
I think it's wonderful that we have the viewport measurement right now. I mean, I don't even know when that showed up, but it hasn't been too long since I realized it was there. So like, oh, okay. Now we have like a browser has awareness of how wide and how tall the frame is, you know.
Right.
Now we can start to design to the frame. You know, having this one arbitrary width with the arbitrary breakpoints is so strange. And I think that is, you see that changing design, and it's fascinating, the back and forth, the way just introducing something like that, what influence that has. But I think, you know, it's always, we wrestle with educating the content creators and the site owners and what can and can be done. They want to do certain things. They want to stick images in the text and wrap the text around them, and it is a challenge. But I think it's an education challenge. Probably 80% education.
Yeah.
And I don't think we do a good job talking about web design as its own distinct thing. Maybe we're getting better. You know, now everyone's a UX designer, they're not web designers anymore. But in a way that's good, I guess, because it encompasses actions, designing actions.
Right.
You know, and I think that's good, but I think it's still. I read this interesting piece, and I should have put a link to it in the presentation. It's an interesting piece. What people want to be called, web designers want to be called, and they interviewed a lot of the top designers, and most of them said, you know, sometimes they're just not up for the battle. Go ahead, call me a web designer, or you know, because a person outside of our industry doesn't know what a UX designer is, or a UI designer. It gets complicated, right? You know, but thank you, great discussion. I loved it.